Casey, thanks for joining me today, man.
Yes, glad to be here, man. Good to see you again.
You as well. It's been too long. This all started with you actually asking me to be on your podcast, and I get this question a lot personally now that I've started one, and I'm just curious. I think I know the answer, but why did you start a podcast?
I started the podcast not for anything other than people saying they didn't even tell me this. They told me to start a podcast, but they did it indirectly. People were like, with the people I meet, the conversations I have, it was like, what if you recorded all this? What if you were able to record all these conversations that you have, all these experiences you run into, all that stuff? Because I don't know if it's blessed or I'm a glutton for punishment, but I've been exposed to a lot of things, career or whatever you want to call it. And so it was more of just like, all right, let's talk about those conversations. And then it morphed into, well, what's going on behind the scenes with all these successful people? And like what's going on mentally, physically, relationships. Like so then the criteria was if you're on the podcast, you have had some success. We don't have to talk about all that. That's known. That's a prerequisite. But once you get on there, it's like, well, what was that like? Was it the best day of your life when you hit the pinnacle, or was it the worst day? And so it was kind of getting down to and it was more to fulfill a need for myself of learning how other people are dealing with this, this whole thing, running a business and all that stuff. And it was just simply a vice to record it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of knew the answer there because I've listened to a couple of the
Sure.
episodes now. But I thought it was important too because we have a similar reason, similar why of why we're doing this, and going down this journey and opening ourselves up for criticism. And there's just this whole host of things that can come with it. So I wanted to touch on that first and foremost. But then, I think it's so interesting for those that are early in their career, and you hear one of the first things that you hear is, "Hey, go find a mentor," and that's all great, But a lot of times, what happens when you find one is they don't talk about these other things that come along with whatever field or industry that you're in, and the relationship between what's going on personally and how that all meshes together. And your podcast does, which I think is
Yeah.
incredible. So
Yeah.
maybe talk about for just a minute here, why you wanted to focus on that route. What value you hope to provide and kind of, solving problems for people that maybe don't have an outlet to focus on those types of issues.
So the whole thing started with a group I formed when I was 29, and I was in public accounting, as you know, and was done with that. Um, Went and worked for a client. They gave me that VP of Finance title, which we all know where all these titles go now. They're not as prestigious as they once were, but that's a podcast for another day. But it was a big deal. I was taking the place of a guy who was 15, 16 years older than I was, and all of a sudden I'm in this space of these higher echelon people that didn't think I deserved to be at the table. So they wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't engage. They wouldn't try to help me. And so I basically started to create this group of guys that were my age that had either started business and were successful or had similar situations to me. We grouped up. We started doing these retreats twice a year. We got to Chattanooga, Asheville, something like that. And then we'd always have like somebody who's much older who's done it all that wants to kind of like mentor us for a weekend, if you will. Well, that ended up creating these relationships I've had for the last 7 or 8 years. One in particular, which was Alex Hunter, and he just was like, "Hey, man, I love what you're doing. Can I just hang around for the ride?" And so to have somebody finally just say, "Hey, you come to me, you start a business, I'll be right there," blah blah blah, was so massive. But I had to create the whole thing first, and then it came out of that because anything I've done has been basically like I create these things to help myself, and then if somebody else gets a byproduct of it, then that's just a bonus.
Yeah. I think, obviously we're putting these out there for others, right? We're trying to be a resource, spread knowledge, that sort of thing, talk about pain points, whatever. But at least personally, I'd be lying if I said there's not a ton that I'm getting out of this as well, right? We're both accountants. We're not naturally more extroverted people, carrying on conversations. What I've found over the course of just 5, 6, 7 recordings so far is that um, I'm becoming more and more of a better listener already. Um, I'm learning to articulate and communicate better already. So there's certainly some selfish aspects to it. Is that kind of things that you're seeing as well?
Totally. I'm usually control conversations. It takes a lot of energy to get in a group of people. So if I'm going to get there, I'm going to come with all this energy and lead conversations and just kind of own the space, if you will. So to take a step back and have to just sit and let people breathe and then not make it all about my talking, it was something new because generally people now, I mean, that's my business. People are coming to me for advice. They're coming to me to fix things. And so in this case, it's like, it's almost like if metaphorically, you're sitting at the feet of somebody and you're just gleaning as much as you can. And it's hard at first, like we were talking right before. Like it wasn't fun at first. It was like, oh, this is like hard work. My brain hurts after listening and thinking of what the next question's going to be. And oh, they just went down this rabbit hole here, and I'm like, how do I bring them back, or do I even need to bring them back? So for sure, I know, especially in my relationships with my wife and two daughters, it's it hasn't come up that this is the reason, but it has. My ability to like not talk immediately once I hear something is completely that, and always responding with yeah, because if you do that on a podcast, it does nothing but annoy people. And so that was one of the first critiques I got. They're like, you're overly responding to everybody, and it's like all you gotta do is shake your head. So there was this like technique where I kind of crunch my lips down to shut up. And so I've gotten past it, but yeah, it was a little tough at first, and I've definitely gleaned the same thing, and certainly have found myself in yeah, you're open to critiques and all these other things that come with it, but I'm not on social media, so I don't really care, and I've never been somebody who cares because I know that all the feedback I'm getting through text messages and all this random stuff is like, okay, this is this is doing what we wanted it to do, and it'll go
Yeah.
wherever it needs to go.
Before we relate all that back to business and life, are you one of the podcasters? Do you listen to yourself at all?
So I do. It's very hard, but I do, and so I won't listen to the whole thing, but I will generally go through the intros and the opens, and I'll pick different spots to just kind of sit in, and then a guy that kind of jumped on to do it with me, Steven, we critique each other, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So and generally I already know what he's going to say. He's like, your intro on this guy seems so like you winged it or something. Like he'll say something like that. I'm like, I kind of did, and he's like, yeah, well, it was funny, but it may take away from what we're trying to blah. So a lot of it had to do with just being really prepared. Come sit down, set up, to get everything right, and but yeah, there's definitely learned a lot from that whole situation.
Yeah, I'm still undecided in my journey whether or not I will listen. My initial thought was absolutely not. I don't want to listen to myself
Yeah.
speak. But I'm also one of those people that I want to get better, right? And I want to learn how to articulate better. I've said and already twice in this sentence. Those things, right? You listen to yourself, you get better. So there, I want to focus on finding ways to get value out of listening to it and get past the listening to yourself and the fear of critique. So let's relate all that back to business now. You are owner of Incado Partners. What do you all do? And then we'll relate kind of the podcast to it.
So we are an outsourced CFO firm, and the biggest difference, that's the short version of all this, is that we're more of a permanent placement for companies. So we'll start with them when they're very just coming out of startup mode, or just had a round of funding, or just got a big SBA loan, or things of that nature, and then we'll hop on board with them, and then we'll ride with them as long as they want us to ride with them. certainly big enough to have their own CFO full time now. But with me and my team, we've just been able to continue to make it a part-time position. So where a lot of fractional CFOs are like, all right, let's get in here, let's do our thing, we're interim, we're kind of filling a gap. We're like, no, we want to be here for the long haul. So that's that's basically it. And then the second part of what we do is we do a lot of M&A for clients. We don't really do one-off deals for outside people unless they ask or they need help or whatever that is. But for clients, we have several clients in the space buying different assets or wanting to exit. And so I've got a ton of experience in due diligence and working with attorneys and tax, being in tax for all the years I was to be able to navigate those things as well. So those are the two main aspects of it, and we've been pretty successful to this point to just kind of stay in that specific lane. Don't do any taxes, no audits, and so we get a lot of referrals from tax firms and lawyers and banks because we're not competing with any of them. So
Right.
we're providing a space that helps them do their jobs easier. And then if we provide clean financials, then that helps as well. I guess the third thing we do is we close books really fast. Within the first 10 business days, we're done with everything as long as we have all the information. And that's because Cato means to march forward, to take a step in Latin. Um, I just changed the vowel so I could trademark it. It's actually like Incito, but I changed it to A, and I heard the Italian pronunciation. It was like Incado, and I was like, okay, not that sophisticated, so we're going to call it Incado. But so that was the thing too. So we're always looking forward. It's like, all right, let's get these financials done, means to an end. What are we going to do with that? We track those things the client wants to do. We work on those throughout the month, and then we come back the next month to see if it happens. So that's the very, and that all got born out of the tax firm that we both were at last. So
Yeah, so let's dig into that. So you gave us kind of the genesis of the name Incado. What is the genesis of why you were doing what you're doing?
so when I was at previous firms, it's very structured on, and it always has been, and always will be. You're not. I don't think you're going to go in and disrupt uh, the way people do business inside of a public accounting firm. You're just not. There was a entrepreneurial services group at the last firm I was at, and I went in thinking, okay, we're going to be working with small business, but we're also going to be helping the small businesses uh, expand and grow, scale. And that made me feel, that gave me a lot of juice because if I have to just close books every month, it's monotonous and I'll lose my mind. But if I could take the books and do something with it and be creative, which is the thing, part of my brain that some accountants have, some accountants don't. There's not many that have that creative side. There was like, well, what can we do with this data? Well, they didn't have a code when you used to put your time in for that kind of CFO role, but I was doing it anyway. So what I came to understand is like, okay, I'm a cog in this wheel. This department is like 30 people. Like I get it. They're going to do their thing. So let me go out and get away from this for a little bit of time. And so I did two turnarounds, which we can go in deep with those or not deep with those, but basically companies that are either in distress or trying to figure out all their systems, and you come in and you get it all rolling, and then you kind of move to the next one. Once I got done with that second turnaround, we were having our second kid, and I was completely burned out. Like mentally was not good, physically was not good. I was just an absolute mess. And we're bringing another kid in this world. My back is wrecked. It's been wrecked. More on that later if it comes up. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I don't. I'm gonna miss the whole new part of this next kid like I did the first one. And so I just decided, with the help of my wife, saying, "Hey, I don't think you're employable anymore," is what she told me. I'd already had Incado on the side that I was already running, and so I was just kind of doing it on the side. And then that freedom to just go anywhere, do what I want, work with people I want to work with, it really came out of maybe it's my inability to, have bosses, I guess, is like probably the layman's terms of it. But it really was like my brain is always open, it's always creating, it's always thinking of new things. And I felt like in an environment where someone else is completely in charge, it causes a ton of conflict. And I just didn't want to continue to have bad experiences with people because I was playing it safe with some W-2 income. So that's really what it was. And that took a leap of faith, and there was a lot of, you know, wonderings involved on if I could pull it off. It's just one of those things you're like, why didn't I do this sooner? But that's how life is in general.
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest issues I had with public accounting, at least in my experience, right? And this isn't everyone's experience, just in mine, was that I found myself working more on compliance and not being that resource. Like we've talked about, like this is a reason why we're doing this podcast. It's the
Right.
reason I do everything I do, right? I want to be a resource. I want to be helpful. I want to put good out into the world. And I just didn't feel like I was doing that, right? I was getting a set of circumstances and I was filing those set of circumstances appropriately, not providing any real value. I just didn't love that, right? So that led to my career choice. It sounds like it led to yours. So how does then the podcast, this new venture that you've been going on for a couple months now, how does that relate to your process, your goal with Incado Partners?
So I knew that I didn't ever really want to sell Incado Partners. Like I just don't have the desire because I'm working on all these M&A deals and I see this transitions and I see all this stuff. I think it's just it's just another step towards building relationships. And you'll hear my clients on there. You won't know if they're my clients or not, but you'll hear them on there. And it's just this collaborative of like, if if someone was in my spot 10 years ago and is like wanting to do something like this, like could they get the strength and the enough of their questions answered through listening to the podcast or whatever. And that's the only way I know how to get it out, because if I'm not on social media, I'm not constantly putting stuff out there about this or that. That really is the only medium that feels personable enough to me to use and exercise to make all of it happen. And um, I guess another reason is I didn't have a very good last year of high school. Like last semester, a lot of stuff went down, and I alienated a lot of people. So I kind of left high school and like went away, like like didn't ever come back. Moved on west side of town and just like I'm done with this place and these people. And this is kind of a long, winding road, so I'll try to be quick with it. But then I meet up with Steven, who's on my podcast too, and we started a nonprofit. And then that nonprofit showed showed to be where all these people from high school would come every year, and it was almost like a reunion. So I had to start facing these people again, and things were okay. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And then now we had 5 people at our high school that went pro in one of the sports, and that's kind of what you can see behind me. Um, and some of those people, I didn't know if they like their last experience with me was bad. So I'm like, it was more of like I'm scared of this. So what do I do when I'm scared? Like let's go and do that. So back to the whole thing, I've had to lean into this thing because it scares the crap out of me and it causes me anxiety. And I'm like, well, then I have to do it. And so that was the thing. Other than telling people, hey, I'm going to do this, sitting on it for a year, not doing it, and being one of those guys. And then I finally got with somebody who said, just hit record and start talking. And and it's a huge outlet. It's like therapy for me, honestly. It's just so like, I just feel so good. Like I feel so full again from not harboring any things towards anybody else or having people that I thought disliked me and just carrying that. It's like all getting out of the open. So it's much deeper than like the business and all this other stuff. It has become like this really big therapeutic, whatever you want to call it for me. And I'm like, well, we're just gonna keep going. We're just gonna keep having fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, you've had an impressive guest list so far. I've listened to quite a few of them. You know, Ben Moore is going to come
Yep.
on this one. He's got an incredible journey. I'm looking forward to having him on there. So Ben, if you're listening, you can't back out. We've already told
No,
everyone you're
can't back
coming.
out.
Can't back
Got
out
to.
now.
Got to.
You
He's
know,
my first
I,
one, by the way.
I
He
saw,
was the
yeah,
first one. Yeah, he's the
it was a
very
good
first
first
one.
one too. So then, you know, before we jumped on, we were talking about you're at the fun part, right? So obviously it was terrifying at the beginning. Maybe talk a minute about putting yourself out there, I think maybe it was on the Ben episode or maybe your teaser episode, you mentioned, opening yourself up to scrutiny. That's not something that anybody wants to do, right? I've struggled with that, both, professionally in the podcast, trying to build a personal brand on social media. You're opening yourself up. It's terrifying, but how do you get over that?
So I've always had this. I don't know. I've always been built that way where I just didn't care what other people thought. But at the same time, I'm bringing in Steven. I've brought in other people. So it does bother me. I feel responsible for that part of it. I think the biggest thing is I got this. I had somebody who's done it a long time that kind of was the guy that said hit record and go. And he gave me this, like, he emailed me this kind of like, I don't know, almost like this statement of like, hey man, here's all you need to do to know how to do this. And one of the biggest things he said is, if you want to, put a disclaimer out that I'm not an expert and that our goal is to only like do this in order to help people. That's it. We don't want to go down some crazy road of trying to be an expert. Definitely not telling people what to do because I don't like being told what to do. So I think by staying away from social media has helped me not see if there's any criticism. And then I think if I did have any criticism, I think because of the listening skills I've gained from this whole venture, I could listen to what they're saying, and maybe there's something in my tone that needs to change. Like maybe there's something there, not what I'm thinking, because I know what I'm thinking is pure and it's good, and it's like that's all good. So I think through any of that criticism or scrutiny, it's going to be there no matter what. I mean, I watch people who are awesome and you know them personally, and you're like, there's not a thing wrong with them, but somebody's going to find a thing wrong with them because of the way they hurt. And I think my whole life I've been misunderstood on how I talk, in my voice, and my eyebrows are in a, like The Rock from, back in the day when he would like scrunch his eyebrows. They just sit there. So I always kind of look upset, all the time. And I can be very monotone and very matter of fact. It's not that it doesn't completely bother me, but at the same time, if it's people I know and it's good feedback, and I'm not gonna say that like it's fun to hear that stuff, but at the same time, it's like, all right, what can I pull from it and be better at?
Yeah, I came to the realization, I think, at some point, is that kind of like what you said in terms of starting a business. I was playing it safe in a lot of ways, and this is kind of my first step in trying to correct that and just grow as a person, right? You and I used to do CrossFit together, and one of the great benefits of CrossFit is you're constantly putting yourself in an uncomfortable position physically. And I was really good at doing that. And I talk about this in my teaser video and some of my other episodes as well. I was really good at doing that physically, but I never accomplished doing it in this way, where I was putting myself out there in front of others at something I wasn't good at. So that's been important for me. Um, in terms of trying to get back to relating it to the business, one of the things that I've always been focused on is just putting out good vibrations into the world, being a resource. Have you noticed that, doing this podcast, kind of having a similar mindset, and also in the way that you attack business, have you noticed that you're, kind of receiving some of that back?
Yeah, and I don't know if you call it karma, mana, blessings, whatever your yes. I think that I've not really mixed it with business in the sense of uh, like it affects the day to day, or I talk about it with my clients if I want to come on during the financial meeting or whatever. Side, talk to them on the side. But I think yes, I think somebody told me the feedback they gave me is like it makes me more human. I think there's a lot of things with me that people think because I'm kind of an old soul that I'm a bit robotic or maybe a lot robotic, and like there's just no veering off of that. There's no, there's personality, but not a ton of, I don't know what it is. But anyway, so it's allowed people to say, oh, you got emotions. Like you're digging deep into those emotions. And then my clients already know it because they like when something's going on in my life, I let them know so they know that I'm not slacking or anything like that. So I'm already probably way too personable for most people's standards. So adding that to this and doing everything else is just a big like, all right, I am goal wise trying to get to a point where I can just be naked and understanding that it's just like I am what I am. And then the whole tough exterior that people have basically created for me based on how I act and how I've lived and how my upbringing and stuff, I can now shed that with confidence and just say, like, no, I've got some demons I got to deal with every day, and it's a it's a ride, it's just a ride. And people are like, they're just flabbergasted sometimes when they hear anybody people that know me that it's just like, oh, and then someone off the cuff listening to me, who knows what their reaction is to what I'm saying, but I do extend with relationships that like I'm gonna know you. I'm not I can't just talk bits and pieces and so I've had to so I've had to really just people know that now. They know how I am, that there's this deep sense of responsibility and caring for other people. And it's come out through these business and the podcast unintentionally. And it's a good outlet for me, which makes it not a burden to do, I guess. It's not a
Yeah.
burden to run the business now. It's not a burden to do the podcast because I put my own sense on it and allowed it to be Casey's, if you will, instead of what I think it should be, or I'm
Yeah.
modeling it off of someone else.
So then thinking about, obviously within the context of the business, right? You've seen a lot over an 11-year career in public accounting. Um, you know the blocking and tackling, right? You can
Yep.
guide customers or clients based on your experiences of seeing either similar or like experiences from someone else. But like you were saying at the beginning, there's this whole other intangible to it, this whole mindset behind the business world. Now you're bringing that in through conversations. Are you seeing, talking through that more mindset, intangible, uh, strategic items come through in your ability to provide value to your clients?
Yes. I think the thing that catapulted Incado to where it is now was the ability to understand what the client was most afraid of or most worried about, and then bring comfort through numbers with that, like to answer those questions. And like you said earlier, filing, doing compliance, all that stuff is good, but sometimes early on, I would prepare all these reports that nobody ever looked at because that's not what their issue was. Their issue might have been like we got great EBITDA, but our cash flow stinks. But nobody thinks to look at cash flow because they just want to get everything reconciled and check the box. So now it's like, well, we're done, but they're not done, and they're going to bed every night wondering what's going on. So I think I really attack pain points for people and try to figure out like what's bugging you, like why why are you talking to us, and what's brought you here, and why is just a normal bookkeeper not enough for you? Like all that stuff. Why is a normal tax firm not enough for you? And so you're seeing more and more of this happening. You're seeing these firms either outsourcing work, like the compliance part of the work, the filing part, and then you have managers, checking all of it, and then the partners or the owners are spending a lot more time in the strategy world because, in my opinion, our generation's more personable. And what I mean by that is I'm 37. We were right on the cusp of all the social media stuff. You had to have a college email when I was in college to be on Facebook. Not your mom couldn't get on Facebook. The kids couldn't get on Facebook. It was just college. So we grew up outside of it, and then we got thrust into it in college, and so we're like the hybrid. And so now through the pandemic, through all things that social media can do to people mentally, I think my generation has gone. We're going back to the personal side. It was better. It felt better. It was less depressing. It was all these things, and I think just happening to grow up when I did or being born when I did has kind of shaped that whole thing. And so I go to like let's cut through all the crap and go straight to the real part of you. And I challenge clients sometimes when I see them when they talk about what they're posting and what they're doing and different things and talking about different stuff, and it's all kind of a facade. And I'm like, eventually we're gonna get you're gonna get found out on all this stuff. Like, that imposter syndrome is real if you're really an imposter. So I think that's even a fresh perspective. Like, you don't normally hear that from your CPA or your accountant. Like, hey man, this is all for show. Like, we're not really doing anything here. So you want to do something, and if you do, like how do we get there? So
Yeah.
it's trenches. It's all in the trenches all the time, and that's just the way it is. That's how I work, and some people love it, and some people are intimidated by it, and it's just. But there's enough people that love it that I've got plenty of my time's taken up in a good way for all those people.
Yeah, I want to focus in on two parts of that you were just talking about. First being, the whole um, idea of attacking something from a problem solver mindset, right? I think that gets lost a lot in today's world. Like we were saying with the whole compliance thing on the tax, right? Like you just get a set of circumstances and you deal with it. There's no value add or problem solve, and so you don't have to be that great at selling, right? As we think about it, if you could just go to someone and say, what are your pain points and how can I fix it? Or this is how I can fix it. Even better if you're coming with a solution to it. So how do you try to attack business from that perspective? Because it seems like maybe we're aligned there as well. And then secondly, I wanted to focus in on this whole idea of authenticity, because from a marketing standpoint in the world of AI, I think the reason why I'm doing this podcast, one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, the more that you can show your authenticity and who you are, the more you're going to separate yourself from the rest of the world in this environment. Just trying to get your thoughts on those two items.
Yeah, so they're kind of merged together in the sense of this didn't I didn't get any like epiphanies from this book that I'm about to talk about, but I did get confirmation, and it's called The Go Giver. And part of that whole system of that thing is, what are you doing? What is your purpose for gaining traction in corporate world, business, whatever? If it's to make money, you'll get there and you'll be miserable and or you'll fail. One of the three things, will happen. And then there's this other set of principles that basically Cliff Notes version is you treat every person like a human being and you try to help them. And then what the byproduct of that is naturally is that they will hire you to help them. And so sometimes a lot of times I have to tell people like I'm not the guy. You're not in a place for what we do yet. Like all the time. But I've built up enough of a network to go deep with these other vendors, as I call them, to say, hey, but you can go talk to this person, they'll take care of you, that sort of thing. So I think that whole philosophy of just being completely upfront with people and authentic, as you mentioned, it raises this thing of like, oh, this person cares for me first, and then if there's some sort of engagement where there's money exchange, then that's secondary to all of this. Now we know that money is a mean, like you have to have it and you can't work for free. So, but there's a strict understanding through most people that you're gonna that's just it is what it is. That's cost doing business. But if you were in a spot where they believe you and they think you're a good human being from the jump, then when it comes time for that, it's very simple. I don't usually ever have people argue with me about fees and you cost too much or this or that. I don't really have to deal with that because the alternative is like, okay, then I'll recommend you to somebody else. And so the fact that I'm not chasing their dollars or their fees, I think puts me in a category of, well, even if I'm not working with him and I go to somewhere else or whatever, if I ever need to call Casey and ask him a question, he's probably going to answer. And I do. And sometimes you'll see that stuff come all the way back around 3 or 4 years later, and that might be $100,000 client. But I don't think of it that way. I just like, okay, here's another person I've met. I like this person. I hope they do well. And I've got this thing where if you go into business for yourself, I never understand why there's a such an onus that it has to suck and you got to work all these hours and you got to like it's like why get out of your regular W-2 job if you're going to live like that. So I'm just on this crusade to help people find like what kind of life they really want to live and what their purpose is for the business. And then if those things align with me, then we're off to the races. And mine is all lifestyle. Can I go to everything my kids are involved in that I want to? Can I travel without having to be online all the time? Like, do I have to work at night? Do I have to work on the weekends? And being in public accounting, we remember all that. Like, it was just required. It was what it was. And you always miss the Masters and you always miss March Madness. And heaven forbid you had a kid be born in March. That was just absolutely not good. So I think it's all the authenticity with people and just helping them to understand you and you understanding them, which is a skill I think that a lot of people have to learn. But it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, just listening to people and figuring out what that is, and then just being of service to people.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of segued there. You kind of led me into what I wanted to talk about next, and just lifestyle, right? I've gotten from a couple of your episodes that that's a priority for you. How do you merge that into your life? I heard you say on one of your podcasts you don't like the term work life balance, which I can understand that. But how do you merge that, right? How do you come at it from a priority standpoint of like, hey, I'm doing this business for a reason. It's to obviously help and serve my clients, but to also allow me to live the life that I want to live. What's kind of your mindset there? How do you approach it?
So at first I did a very bad job at this, and I left the job I was at because I was burned out, and then within a year I was burned out again. So obviously there was a paradigm shift that needed to happen mentally. It wasn't just circumstances, like that wasn't going to change it. It was me. So what I ended up having to do, I grew up where we didn't have a ton. We weren't poor by any means, but there was always a feeling of like this financial scarcity. Like, was there enough to kind of get by? And so that kind of stays with me. So you're just kind of like, well, I just have to make as much money as I can, so I never find myself in that position. Well, what gets lost in all that is, you get going and you don't remember 4 or 5 years of your life because you were just grinding and making money. That's and I did that for a while. So I think the whole bit of that was I saw how my parents worked all the time. Um, both of them worked. I saw the effect that it had on me, good or bad. They did the best they could. But I just decided, like, if I'm going to be heavily involved with my kids, I'm going to have a good, deep relationship with my wife, like I do with clients and different things like that, then I'm going to have to spend some time doing that. I have to, like, invest. And so somebody described it as like you're a great CEO of Incado, but you suck at being CEO of your household. And I was like, that's fair. Stings a little bit, but I'll peel that back in a couple of days when I'm ready to hear that. So what ended up happening is I started to fire clients and let people go in the office that were just toxic. And it became less about scaling to the next revenue number and more about um, how does everybody here enjoy what we're doing and we get along? Because I'm spending a lot of time here, well, 8 hours a day or less or whatever, and then going home. How does my house run if I'm not engaged? So I have to be in both. I have to switch off one and go to the other. Like they can't. So that led to like some practicals of like before 8 o'clock, it's all personal time. If I get up at 5 in the morning and I'm bored to death, great, find something to do. But you're not working. When I get home, besides maybe a call or two while I'm doing the dishes or something after the girls are getting in, showers and bath and all that stuff, I'm not working at night, hanging out with my wife, not working on the weekends. But what you have to do is I had to pare down the business. I couldn't continue to chase those revenue goals. I had to pare it down. It was scary at first, and then now it's become the norm, and it's just how I do things. And I've been lucky enough to find enough employees that mimic that kind of thing to where everybody just trusts each other and we just get our work done, to where I can just freely move in space. And they got my back, I got them covered, and it's just it's like a cohesive organism if you want to get scientific with it. But I had to make some major changes, and they had to be not just ideas. I had to block that time out on the calendar each day for a long time to say, this is a safe area for family. This is my safe area for work. So I had to have a conversation with my wife about, hey, love to talk to you during the day, but if we can keep it to like just needs only for the during the day, that'd be awesome. And so she respected that once I showed her the other side of it. And so now I can cram everything into about 6 hours of just work. And I got flexibility everywhere else. And so it's cut my days down to 30 to 35 hours a week, and still close to what we were doing before, but with less people and more efficiency.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up. You didn't specifically say the word boundaries, but you're essentially getting to it. That's
Huge.
been
Yeah.
it's been an
Yeah.
overwhelming theme of everyone that I've talked to so far. Right? Is I was expecting, and I said this in the last episode. I was expecting everyone to come on and talk about priorities, visions, goals, those types of subjects. What I wasn't expecting was everyone to come on and talk about priorities and how those two relate and how to manage your personal desire to grow as a business with also setting those boundaries to where you can still live your life to the fullest, right? Because if you're not doing that, then you're going to wake up at 60, 70 years old and you're going to be miserable. Um, and so that, I think it's just funny that you bring it up too, without even me leading you there, because it's been an overwhelming theme across everyone that I've talked to. I think one of the other things that you mentioned that's been incredibly helpful for me over the last couple of years is when I first got into my career, my calendar was everything that I needed to get done in a workday. And at some point, I don't know why, I don't know how, at some point I started using my calendar for just my life in general, right? So I do the same thing where I'm an early riser. I wake up at 4:30, and from 4:30 to 5 on my calendar, it's, personal time, like wake up type time where I'm doing something less stressful, reading, hanging with my dogs. If my fiance's up, talking to her, then I have my workout time in there in my calendar. It's given me the ability to say, no, this is when I'm going to do this. I'm going to knock it out. I'm going to get it done early. And then, you know, a little bit of more personal time after that. And then my work time is, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, 8 to 7, whatever it might be, kind of depending on the day. And then again, I've got that blocked off like, hey, this is my mindset. I've put it down on paper. This is what I'm going to do. And for me, it sounds like for you, it's just been one of the game changers for me over the last couple of years as I think of my calendar as, no, this is my life, not just my work. Right. And that's kind of medged this whole like work life balance. It's a cliche terminology. I know you don't love it. But just like finding that balance in life, right? That's been helpful for me.
It's not that I don't like work-life balance. I think it's like when people talk about what's the definition of insanity, like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Literally, that's not the definition. It's like ineptinism or something like that. It's not insanity. Insanity that is not the definition. So I think what's happened is work-life balance in its origination, yes, meant what it meant, and it meant what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
it has turned into this thing of like, how do you merge your work to your home? And I'm like, that's not what it was designed to, that concept is not what that thing was designed to do. And priorities and balance, I've learned that if I don't write all this stuff down and really see how things are going to play out, my mind will tell me that it's a lot worse than it is. And that's just the way it is. Because if that's when emotions kick in. So then all of a sudden it's like I'll walk in and I'll be like, gosh, I'm so stressed today. We got so much to do. And then by 11 o'clock, I've counted through everything. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do for the rest of the day? And those are days or weeks where I didn't plan accordingly, so I don't know what's going on. And so I think just simply setting it and forgetting it. I mean, I know some people that do it to the T. They track every hour of the day, and that's fine. I did more of blocks, and I put those boundaries around those blocks. And so, like, I can get up and work out, or I can get up and read, or whatever. But it's kind of like whatever that time is, and then you just start to work within that, and it really comes down to what's your purpose. And I don't think enough people want to sit in that long enough to figure out what that truly is. And I think it changes several times over the course of your life. And people will do the same things over and over again 5 years, 6 years later, and wonder why it doesn't have the same effect. And because you're different, and you got to retool it all, and you got to retool relationships. And I don't know. I just find myself like again, like with all the back issues I've had, and now getting closer to 40, I'm like, gosh, did I just piss away my youth? And I'm like, not. I didn't if I learn from all of it, and I take 37 on, and I'm just like absolutely living each day doing my thing. And I think that's the cool part is getting into that mindset of, I don't know, serving in any way you can think of. But how do you get to where you can stay on that game all the time? You have to invest a lot of time in yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a great point and kind of a great place to wrap up. Because obviously, again, another major overall theme is doing things for yourself, investing in yourself. Otherwise, you can't consistently show up and show out for others in the way that you want to in your business life, family life, whatever it might be. Before we wrap up, did want to finish with a story just because I still laugh about it to this day. So the way I met Casey is was in the public accounting world. Uh, Coincidentally, worked at the same firm, different times. I think you
Mm-hmm.
left like a month before I joined. Kind of moved up the ranks there. So started as a senior, moved up to supervisor, and then eventually a manager, and started taking over clients throughout that process. Casey being one of those clients that he was working for and I was working with. At the same time, he joined the CrossFit gym that I was working out at. And unknowingly, we were working out with each other during the morning and then emailing back and forth. And one of the days, finally after 2 or 3 weeks, we put two and two together that we were working out with the person that we emailing, but it took a while, which I've always thought was such a funny story. But Casey, where can folks find you if they want to get in touch, specifically with the podcast and everything you're doing on the business side?
Yeah. Well, to finish off, I remember finish off that story the way I remember it. Is you were screaming at me as I was doing some sit-ups, and then it all kind of came to me. And then later that day, you were asking for a trial balance, and I go, I'm still hurting from where you were screaming at me this morning, and I just left it at that. And you go, you want to what? And I was like, yeah, you were screaming at me this morning, and now you want your trial balance. And I think that was kind of how. And then it was like, whoa. And then it just provided this kinship because I knew what you were going through, and I knew I was out of it. And
Yeah.
I remember, like towards the end of tax season, you weren't as consistent because I knew your body was breaking down, you were mentally breaking down. And I was like, man, if you can ever get out, get out. But and then obviously you got out pretty quickly after that, and we stayed in touch. But people can find me at Casey at IncadoPartners.com, CASEY at INCADO partners with an S.com. And the reason why I just give people my email is because I check it. And I have people that work for me and do all that stuff, but I've tried that before where somebody's overlooking your inbox. And if Jeff Bezos can check his email, certainly I can too. So that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. We have a contact form on the website, but it goes to somebody else and then gets over to me. So, but we're just the podcast is on Spotify, Apple, and we're just trying to collaborate and spread good stuff. And we're not competing with anybody, which is why I was like, hey man, you want to come on? You're like, yeah, if you come on. I'm like, cool, cool. Whatever you're doing is going to reach a different audience somewhere, and then those people listen to the same thing, and it's all a collaborative effort that I think that there's a core group of people that I'm around that seem to just want to, I don't know, they want to learn from other people, but they also want to make people's lives better. So, anyways, that's where to find me. And then it's not hard to find me. It's
Yeah,
hard to
I'm
find me on
glad you
social media,
remember.
but otherwise.
I'm glad you remember more of the specifics than I do. I don't remember it going down that way, but
Yeah,
it tracks and it sounds right. So I'm gonna agree with you, and we'll just go from there.
that sounds good. Now I have a weird ability to remember very specific facts that nobody else remembers, and they can't remember, so I rule on that
Yeah,
stuff. So
that it seems to track, and
yeah,
from looking back at that time period of my life, you're right. I was probably yelling, trying to get you to get that workout done. That seems right.
yeah,
So
that's it.
Casey, thanks for joining, man. I can't wait to join
Yep,
yours. I love what you're
absolutely.
doing. I've enjoyed listening to it over the last couple of weeks, and can't wait to follow along.